White against Tom Flynn. All right, I feel like going violent. E4. Let's go with something more spicy, and we got a Scandi. Okay, so he's pre-moved D5. Now, as you guys know, against the Scandi, okay, knight F6. Now, this is a lesser-known continuation, although it is a very much viable opening, and I've even recommended this to some people. Now, black is trying to take the pawn on his own terms. And many of you may be surprised by this move, because it appears that white can simply play c4 and keep the extra pawn. But if you know the theory of this line, you will know that c4 is not a panacea, because after c4, black has the move c6. And if you take on c6, then after knight takes c6, black gets full control over this d4 square, and black gets tremendous compensation for the pawn. I will show this after the game on the board, but I can't move the pieces. So the best approach here for white, the approach that was taught to me by my coach many, many years ago, is to basically say, all right, you're going to lose this pawn, we're going to give it away, but what we're going to make black do is damage his position, and we're basically going to force black into a very awkward scheme of development in return for taking the pawn. So the first move that we're going to play here is bishop to b5 check. The point is not to keep the pawn somehow, it's to force a piece onto d7. This knight, or if a bishop came to d7, is very awkward, right? He's under a pin. Knight bd7 is a legitimate move. And now we will go knight c3 and try to make it as hard as possible for him to win this pawn back. He should go a6, that's the move. All right, now comes the moment when a lot of people tend to go wrong, because the tempting move is bishop a4, but could somebody tell me how black could meet bishop a4 effectively? Why is bishop a4 like not that great here? What we're going to do is go back all the way to e2. So if we go bishop a4, then he goes b5. He chases the bishop to c3, and then that knight from d7 comes out to c5 like the beast that it is. And that bishop is actually toast. You're going to have to give it up for the knight. We don't want that. Yeah, resign is right. So instead, we want to preserve the bishop. We drop it all the way to e2. This is the line that I was taught many, many years ago. And now he's bringing the knight out to b6, but notice how many moves he's spending on taking back this pawn. In the time that he's doing that, we complete our development as quickly as possible. Now, what does it mean to complete your development here? Well, we can play knight f3 immediately, but what other move should we play, at least after knight f3 or before knight f3 doesn't really matter, but we should play this move at some point. That's d4, just to control the center. And white has a slight advantage. Let's trade the knight in order to avoid him taking and ruining my pawn structure. Takes with a queen, that's a little unusual. I remember knight takes d5 being the move. So here, you know, knight f3 would be fine, but since he's taken to the queen, we need to take a second and consider whether we might not be better off with some other system of development. And okay, c4 would blunder the pawn, so be careful. But I do like an alternative to knight f3 in the form of bishop f3. Bishop f3 gets the bishop to the long diagonal. Everybody should be on board with that. Am I shouting? Am I loud? I tend to speak louder. Let me make the mic a little bit quieter. I think I'm probably loud. Sorry if I am. Okay, so after bishop f3, you guys might be on board with the bishop being on the long diagonal, but once the queen moves away, you might ask yourself, well, wait a second, where are we going to put the knight? Okay, I'm going to make it louder again. Yeah, it takes away knight f3, so how do we resolve that situation? How do we resolve that situation? Yeah, the knight simply comes out to e2, which is a perfectly viable, workable development square. And the purpose of putting the bishop here, not only is it on the long diagonal, it's going to make it hard for him to get his bishop out, because he's going to have to take an extra tempo and somehow protect this b7 pawn, which he will lose if he brings his bishop out. Now, a lot of people, they have a fear of putting the knight on these squares, e2 and d2, which is unfounded. Honestly, knight e2 is almost always a legitimate development square, because the knight can go out to g3, can go to c3. It's not a permanent square, and there's nothing wrong with it. In my experience with students and stuff, people get this aversion to bringing the knights out to anywhere except c3 and f3, which, you know, if you hit the 1800s, you should try to be a little bit more flexible about the way you approach development, because, you know, sometimes it's worth sacrificing a marginal amount of activity to get one of your other pieces to a good square. All right. So he's thinking about where to put his queen. We're going to play knight e2 against almost any move. I mean, other than the check on a5. Yeah, he's taking a while. I mean, I would expect something like queen back to d8. Black is fine here. Nothing terrible. I mean, we're better. We're slightly better, but nothing extraordinary. He's played okay. Queen b5. So this is I think this is interesting because he's defending the pawn of this queen in order, I think, to accelerate the development of the bishop, perhaps to f5 or g4. Now, I know that a lot of you are probably tempted by a4, but remember the golden rule. Do not make a move simply because it creates a threat. That threat has to be meaningful in and of itself. Is a4 a meaningful threat? Well, if you think about it, it is not. Thank you, Oli Pals, because the queen simply drops back to b6, and the queen is even safer on b6 than it is on b5. Let's keep the queen on b5 so that we'll later be able to attack it with moves like c4, more meaningful threats. Let's continue with knight e2. Bishop f5. Okay, now we should complete our development with castles, and so is he. This guy is good. He's playing well. Good active chess. Yeah, don't be reactive. Don't make moves simply because they create threats. All right, so think about what you want to do if he castles. In particular, think about where you want to position this bishop if he castles long, which I'm anticipating. Okay, he goes e6. Never mind. He goes e6. All right. So now the situation has changed. Now the situation has changed. And just because a move is bad in one position does not mean it's bad in another. Notice how the situation has changed. We no longer have to worry about the safety of our king. Our bishop is now pressuring the pawn on b7. As you guys know, the queen is generally the worst defender of any kind of weakness because it's very easy to chase away. So again, now we need to consider a4 in a new light. a4, he drops the queen to b6. We go a5 and chase the queen again. And if he goes back to b5, can you guys find a third way to threaten the queen and basically force it off of its defensive b7? What am I talking about here? a4, queen b6, a5, queen b5. Knight slides into c3, chases the queen, and that queen has to abandon the b7 pawn. Now, if you're smart, after a5, you're going to go queen out back to a7. But that's an incredibly passive square. It's out of the game. That will be a win for us. And then we're going to continue expanding on the queen side and in the center with c4. Yeah, good job. Boom. I'm hoping he goes back because that'll be very instructive. Knight c3. Now, if he goes to b4, that's what I left out. What is white's move there? This is very, very nice. And once you've pushed your pawn to a5, this should be something on the top of your mind. Rook a4 is correct. Beautiful. Rook a4. Now the queen has to go back to d6 or e7, losing the crucial pawn on b7. His position will start to collapse immediately after we take it. I saw rook a4. I just didn't like it. Yeah, exactly. I actually played rook a4. I don't care. I literally don't care. Okay, so bishop takes b7. And this is going to be another great example of not playing reactively. Because after rook b8, I am positive that perhaps most of you would lean toward bringing the bishop back to f3, which would be a completely legitimate move. But there is a stronger move, right? You should always, on every moment, you should consider, well, is there something stronger? Is there a way that I can increase the initiative? And the moment you ask yourself this question, the move queen f3 comes to mind. If you look at that position for a second, you might notice that it does hang c2, but that pawn on c2 is completely unimportant. What's more important here is the advantage in development that we have. That's even more important than the pawn on b7, which we took. Why is that pawn important? Because that pawn was defending the c6 square. So do you guys see that after queen f3, you are preparing at the same time two moves? Bishop f4 developing with tempo, and also bishop drops back to c6 with an incredibly nasty check. And this rook could become involved if we play a later move, d4, d5, and then it could get involved laterally with rook e4. So notice that I'm not really calculating right now. I'm not calculating specific moves. I'm just trying to generate ideas, which really, really helps in like a blitz game. Because it'll allow you to accelerate the pace of your play. Queen f3 I can play almost instantly. He's probably going to take. And then we have a big menu of options. Now, another way to conceptualize this queen on d6, right? We are sort of threatening to play bishop f4 and develop a tempo. But we may also choose to delay that move. We may choose to play bishop f4 at a more opportune moment. The opportunity to attack your opponent's queen is a trump card that you can play at some moment. And playing it too fast can, while it's not terrible in and of itself, I don't know if I'm making sense right now, but you might be forfeiting a more juicy opportunity to play bishop f4. And this is exactly the case here. I think we have an amazing way to set up bishop f4. Oh, actually, no, never mind. Scratch everything I just said. This was a huge mistake because the queen can no longer drop to d8. Now bishop f4 is extremely strong. Can somebody explain to me how rook d8 changed the landscape of the situation? I just didn't internalize that move. Thank you. Ah, poor Cribs. Hello. And thank you. Yeah. Queen can't go back to d7 because of the square. It's got to go to e7. Ugh. And that is devastating. No, bishop c6 first was not necessary. We can play bishop c6 after queen e7. Yeah, now we give this. Now, again, we could take on a6. Notice something very important. Queen c6 check may appear to be more tempting. But as the rule goes, when you have a task, you could do it with multiple pieces. Which piece should you put on that square? The piece of lowest value. Because after queen c6 check, he has the additional opportunity of queen to d7. Not that it saves him. But after bishop c6, he has to drop back with a knight. Look at his king, look at his position. Let's very patiently find the most precise path to victory. Now, how am I thinking about this? What are the candidate moves? Many things win. You can take on c7, that's the simple approach. But I don't find that to be particularly satisfying because he goes rook to c8, he attacks our bishop, we have to spend a tempo. The second thing that I see is the king and the queen on the same file. That is incredibly dangerous. That is an incredibly dangerous situation. How can we exploit it? Well, ideally, we'd play knight to d5 and then smothered mate him on c7. But after knight d5, he plays e takes d5. And we cannot play rook e1 because that square is unprotected. We would blunder checkmate. But in such situations, you can invert the move order. So you can begin with rook e1 and then either play pawn to d5, as many of you are proposing, ripping open the position. But even more effective is the move knight to d5 because it creates the immediate threat against the queen. He probably has to take it and give up the queen, but that loses. Otherwise, we basically checkmate him on c7. Yep, we can play it anyway, knight d5. Threatening smothered mate, which is more important. And we trap his queen too. Look at this position. Complete domination. He has to take. That's the best that he can do, but he's going to be down to queen there. And we're going to have to do some cleanup work, but it'll be very easy. Yeah, the lower piece value thing, I tell that to my students all the time, and it's not a common piece of advice. But if I may, and I appreciate it, Mason, but I'm going to pat myself on the back here and say that I think it's actually very, very helpful because it's not intuitive. People want to do stuff with the highest value piece. You want to do stuff with the queen because it sounds like queen is going to be more reliable at accomplishing a task. But that's not how stuff works on the ground. Sometimes it is. But there are other times when giving a check with a queen is less powerful because he can block with his queen. And he can't do that if you give a check with a bishop. So it does make sense if you think about it. Okay, now what should we do here? How should we keep the foot on the gas pedal? Don't just meekly drop back to g3. You have an opportunity to basically finish the game. Bishop takes c7, exposing the attack on the bishop and against the rook. And this is over. Now he can play rook c8, and then we're just going to vacuum up the bishop and then the pawn. We're going to have a gazillion extra pawns and an extra queen. I had a smothered mate yesterday against Kolars. Yeah, so he correctly plays rook c8. Now there's some shenanigans we could do, but no need. We'll just take. And take, defending the bishop and creating more pressure against the knight. He can actually castle. He should. He should castle here. After bishop takes d7, what would be the idea? The idea would be rook d8, winning back the bishop. It doesn't change anything, though. We don't need to rush into winning this position. We can just bring the rook into the game with rook c4. This position is resignable, not because of the queen, but because of the combination of being up a queen for a rook and a piece, which is legitimate compensation. Oh, and I missed a better move. I missed a beautiful move here. This will be a great challenge for you guys. Queen takes d5 was inaccurate. It's still completely winning, obviously. But I had a beautiful tactical resource. I didn't apply my queen e5, yeah. Forking the rooks. And good job by my opponent to, let's bring the rook into the game, finding the most resilient continuations. So 6, 7 pawns to 4 pawns. We're up 3 pawns as well as a queen for a rook and a piece. So we're up the equivalent of basically like a queen against a rook. This is easy stuff. Just don't blunder your queen. And don't get back ranked. And by the way, I'm not just joking here. When you're in a completely winning position, but let's say you're in small time pressure, what is a good practice? A good practice is to identify potential sources of danger. So that doesn't mean you need to rush and make luft immediately. Just tell yourself, okay, I need to be a little bit careful about the back rank mate. Or make some luft if you have the chance to do so. You know, so or you might tell yourself, well, I need to be careful about the way my pieces are positioned. So here, for example, the move bishop a4 would be a big mistake, believe it or not. And it is precisely, again, because of the vulnerability of the queen's inability to be a reliable defender of other pieces. Who can tell me why? After bishop a4, amazingly, black has the move rook to d8. The queen must move. Now white is winning there too, and I'll show you guys how after the game. How do you do damage control in such situations? But that's unnecessary. So what should we do here? How should white untangle the pieces? And the move here is a little bit paradoxical. Why are the pieces tangled up in the first place? It's because this queen is on d5, stumbling and bumbling and getting in the way of the rest of the pieces. So what we should do is just drop the queen to f3, and in the event that he plays rook c8, we can either play bishop d5, that's the tactical move, or we can simply, oh no, let's not pre-move that, or we can play pawn d5, defending the bishop. So that's the concept of the queen as the supporting actress, which I've sort of peddled that article I wrote on forchess.com a couple of years ago. Yasser Seirawan, that's his phrase. The queen is the supporting actress. Because from the shadows, from a spot where it's safe, it does oftentimes a lot more productive work. And that should be pretty intuitively clear once you pause to think about it, once you actually see what could happen when the queen is right in the thick of things. Is that to say the queen should never be in the thick of things? Obviously not. Now, between d5 and bishop d5, which move is more accurate? Who can tell me? And what is the purpose? Like, doesn't bishop d5 just hang a piece? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It attacks f7, so you're going to take with the queen, creating simultaneously a battery that permits you to take on c4 when the queen defends the bishop. So in that particular instance, the queen is a great defender. Okay, now don't do something fancy like queen f7. That's just asking for trouble. What's the simplest move here? The simplest thing to do here is to understand what the drawback of bishop d6 is. The drawback of bishop d6 is that it releases the f6 square. We don't even need to trade the rooks. We can go queen f6 straight away. We can go queen f6 straight away. That's a fancy move. Because if he takes the rook, again we take on f7, and then we deliver checkmate on f6. We can, for you guys, I would propose taking on c7 just to release the tension. If you're in time pressure, don't deliberately keep the tension to show how cool you are. It's just I'm doing that here to showcase what I think is the most accurate winning path. Knight d7. We can take anything we want. I think the simplest, believe it or not, is... Oh, no, we have a more accurate move. Who can tell me what the absolute most accurate move is here? What is the most accurate move? It's not queen takes f7. Just the move that allows you to win the most amount of pieces here. It's bishop takes f7. Bishop f7, forcing the king to f8. Now, you got to be careful because moving the bishop away opens up the queen to an attack. So instead, we should play what? We should play queen takes. All right. Yeah, don't worry, I won't lose on time. Okay. That's just for show. Okay, yeah, have to turn on the jets in the end. Okay, so knight f6. Let's get back to the analysis. Let's see if we can get one more game in. Now, no, I'm not trying to, I mean, please understand that this is like this is not as hard as it looks. For those of you who have not seen, I mean, I'm a pretty good bullet player, so, you know, I'm used to to converting these positions with 3-4 seconds on the clock. It's just a matter of knowing the patterns. It's honestly nothing to write home about. If you have a million of these mates, you know what to do. Okay. So bishop b5 check, knight b to d7. Now, bishop d7, I believe, is the more popular move. And the idea here is to drop the bishop back to e2. After knight takes d5, d4, look at how awkward this bishop is. It's like in the way of everything. So most of the time, black ends up making another move with the bishop, bishop f5, and white gets a slight edge. I mean, black's position is tremendously solid, so if you want a solid, reputable line, this is something to consider. In addition, there's sort of like a positional trap here. A lot of people play c4 in this position. Who can tell me why c4 is less good than it looks? What does black have in response? That's kind of annoying. Easy question. So it's not knight back to f6. It's not bishop b4 check because this doesn't do all that much. You can just block with the bishop. Well, knight f4 blunders the knight. And, you know, because here your bishop is going to hang, you have to take, and white's going to take with the queen. White's in great shape. It's knight b4. It's not bishop b4, it's knight b4. Why is this all of a sudden so good? Because it's hard to defend against knight c2. It's very hard to defend against. In fact, white has only one serious defense to knight c2. White must play knight a3. And look at how bad this knight is. This knight cannot re-enter the game. No tragedy has happened. Nothing terrible has occurred. But white has all these developmental problems here, given that this knight is really bad, this knight is really good, black is super active, you can strike in the center with c5. This is annoying. So the way that I like to play this with white is to play the move, sorry, let me come back to this position. To play the move a3 first, prophylaxis, covering the square. And then bishop b7, c4, knight f6, knight c3 with a slight edge for white. But you can analyze this and perhaps come close to equality for black. Why is white slightly better? Because white's got a little bit more central control, slightly more active development, stuff like that. All right. Anyways, he goes knight b to d7, knight c3. Oh yeah, and I was going to show why c4 is not as good as it looks. So after c4, c6, if you end up taking, look at this position just sort of carefully. Black's got a lead in development, and this hole on d4 is horrific. And in addition, this bishop on f1 can't really develop to an active square. So this is excellent position for black. If you end up going c4, you should instead go d4 and transpose into the pawn-off attack of the Caro-Kann, which frequently arises via the move order, via the Caro-Kann move order, c4, knight f6, knight c3. So this is just a transposition to the pawn-off where black is considered to be totally fine according to theory, but it's an interesting line. All right, knight b to d7, knight c3, a6, bishop b2. So again, refraining from bishop a4 to b5. He goes knight b6, we go d4. And here he takes with the queen, which is interesting. But I thought knight takes d5 is more solid. Then we would have gone knight f3. Again, similar type of position. But here, and this is a great example of not, you know, of looking concretely. And this is what you have to do when you hit like 18, 1900. Remember how I said c4 was bad in the other position? But you cannot assume that c4 is bad in this position and automatically play a3 because you're going to waste time. c4 is good in this position. Why? Because the situation is different. After knight b4, there used to be a pawn on e6, and so the knight was protected. Now there's queen a4 check, which wins the game. Knight c6, d5. b5, c takes b5. So this is a great example of thinking concretely, even if you think you know the idea. Bishop f3. Okay, so queen b5 is what he played. This is risky but interesting. And I think my opponent started going wrong here. I think this was inaccurate. Now, why is this inaccurate? Because it allows the bishop to remain on f3. Using what I just said, who can tell me what a more accurate development move would have been? Bishop g4 is cooler. That's right. because this invites a bishop trade that white cannot refuse. Why is a bishop trade good for black? Because the bishop is clearly white's strongest piece. Takes, takes. And because of the relatively tame nature of the position, black can afford to spend some time like getting the knight to g4, maybe bringing it back. I think some people might be uncomfortable. It's like, why are we making a bunch of moves with the same piece? Because the reality of the position is that white doesn't have the horsepower or the firepower to really punish black for this. The simple e6 I don't like because it keeps the bishop very confined. I don't like e6. It's not terrible, but it keeps the bishop very confined behind the pawn chain. Although you might have this idea of going bishop d7 to c6. So it's fine. Bishop f5 castles, and here comes the serious error, e6. He just didn't feel the danger at this point. The danger is connected with the fact that this b7 pawn is incredibly vulnerable. Castling long would have been, I think, the best move. And a4 is now not as effective because the king has been delegated the assignment of defending b7. So the queen can move wherever it wants, like queen c4. Maybe we would have still played a4 just to test where the queen wants to go. But even queen b6, as he played in the game, is better here. a5, queen back to b5. And if we mimic the same sequence, it's still kind of good for white, to be honest with you. I mean, you bring your pieces to active squares. At the end of the day, he can play queen b6, and the b7 pawn is not hanging. Or is it? Oh my goodness, this is really cute. What can white do in this position? Loose pieces, drop off. That bishop on f5 is undefended. Amazingly, Maranjo Bayano, thinking about the prime, we can play bishop b7 anyway. King b7, and now fork the bishop and the king with queen f3. So I suppose queen b5, maybe this move is too loose, and in combination with bishop f5, you can see how good this bishop is. So after a4, he has to, I think, play queen d7. This is probably the safest then. Thank you, Mason, gifting to Twitmax. What would white's idea be here? Several possible options. We can play c3, queen b3, trying to pile up on this pawn. But black has the strike with e5. Black can go like this. You can't take the pawn, and the pawn can shove its way to e4. Very complicated position. I don't want to spend too long, but e6 is not great. And then I think the last moment he had before he was losing is this position. He continued not to sense the danger. And queen b5 sort of shows to me that he thinks he's totally safe. And if you look at this position, generally you might be under the same impression. But the story of the game is this pawn on b7. And the secondary storyline is the fact that the queen just isn't a good defender of weaknesses. Bishop e4 in that line doesn't help as far as I could tell. Because bishop e4, you have knight takes e4. This square is defended twice. Does that make sense? Thank you, Suzik, for the 4 months. Pebisman, does that make sense? So knight e4, knight e4, queen, queen e4. That doesn't help black at all. That trade doesn't help. Thank you, Cheskamru. We got a raid. Спасибо большое за raid. I'll just thank in Russian. Не знаю, кто только что стримил. К сожалению, мой стрим сейчас по-английски, но тем не менее, если вы говорите по-английски, добро пожаловать. Вот мы сейчас играем как бы партии на моем как бы секретном нике, и после этого как бы анализируем их, поэтому всем добро пожаловать. Thank you, Aura, for the prime, and 32 fat for the 5 gifted. I appreciate it. Так что если по-английски понимаете, то, пожалуйста, оставайтесь. Можете писать по-русски, я буду переводить, но желательно по-английски. And thank you, Photo Chess and Chess Queen Alexandra and Maria. Appreciate it. Okay, so we were talking about this line. This is winning for white. Thank you, 32 Fat. I appreciate it. Now he plays e6. We go a4. Queen b6, a5. Queen b5 is the crucial mistake. Knight c3. Queen b4, rook a4. If you'd gone queen b7, then we take immediately. So queen b4, rook a4, queen d6, bishop b7, queen f3. Well, I don't know. I can't answer that question, drop to Booty, because I mean, Russian is technically my first language. Okay, so queen f3 is the crucial move, right? We don't just drop our bishop back. Oh, what's up, Chickbungo? Do I want 50 subs? I do. I want nothing more than to receive 50 subs at this very second. Not again. This guy is crazy. I'm not even gonna play the game. I'm just gonna say yes. And I know it's coming. What about 51 subs? Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. We all know what's coming right now. All right, but let's focus on the game. Or let's not focus on the game. Let's focus on the 50 subs we just got gifted. Oh my God, Dikayo on top of it. What is this? What just happened? Oh my gosh. Dikayo just gifted 50 subs on top of that. Oh my goodness. This is completely unexpected. This is completely... What's up? Oh my... Oh, Dikayo, you're ridiculous. And Shigbunga, you're ridiculous too. You're both absolutely ridiculous. I did nothing to deserve this today. I really appreciate it. Oh my gosh. Well, you know what that means, Shigbunga, right? You've met an equal. Hey, this is one chess game I don't mind seeing play out. Alright. Sub battles in the purest sense of the word. Ridiculous stuff. Thank you for the 100 bits. Absolute progress. Well, thank you guys. 2 sets of 50 subs. I have no words right now. But I guess we'll return to the game for now. You can just sense the atmosphere is very charged in a good way. But I really appreciate it, both of you. What supports me more? Well, technically, Dono, I get all of it, but so there's obviously more hype. I mean, I don't like talking about this because everything is incredibly supportive, and I'm deeply honored that people do this. Thank you, followers, and G Cook with a 5 gifted. Oh my goodness. So whatever makes you comfortable is deeply appreciated. Yeah, so I mean, formally I get half of the price of a sub. But you know, again, it raises the hype level and everything is equally appreciated. Oh my goodness, we're almost at 5,000. That's crazy. But let's get back to the game for now. A bit less than half. Yeah, it depends on how much it costs. Now, it costs different for different people, I think. Like, differently sometimes on the phone. Thank you, Von Neumann, 137 for the 3 months. So we go Queen F3 here, right? Defending the bishop and paving the way for Bishop C6. Thank you, G-Cook. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. And the rest of the game is very straightforward. Bishop F4. What's up, Brandon? And Mr. Shrep with the 2 months. Oh my goodness. This is crazy. Now, I wanted just to make one point clear, which is that after a move like Bishop E7, I would advise against Bishop F4. And like I was talking about during the game, what's wrong with Bishop F4? Absolutely nothing. Thank you, Chigbongo. Thank you for the subs. Really appreciate it. This is obviously completely winning. Queen D8, Bishop takes A6, you're up 2 pawns. Whatnot. Queen C6 check is also good. But how can we prepare Bishop F4 so that it's even stronger when it's played? You can play Rook C4. This is a difficult move for some people to play because it involves withholding and resisting the incredibly tempting move until it's more opportune. The moment is more opportune. Castles, Bishop F4. Now look how much stronger this is. If he goes back to D8, what do we have in this position? Well, we have Bishop takes C7, winning the exchange. He goes Queen to D7, and we take with the Rook with a completely crushing position. We're up 2 pawns. This is hanging. Clearly, this is losing. So I think the golden rule here is not to play moves just because they create threats, number one. Even if the threat is very strong, always consider whether you can make a preparatory move to render the threat even stronger. You know, there's the phrase, the threat is stronger than the execution. That has something to do with this, but it's a slightly different point I'm trying to make. What about Bishop G4 where? Oh yeah, that is a good move. We could throw in a check now. That's a great question, though. Thank you, Neo, for the 5. And this forces the king away. But you're right, I missed Bishop G4. I'm sort of trying to illustrate a more general point here, so I agree. But even something like this looks very good, because the king is permanently deprived of castling rights, and This is very strong. So just something to chew on. I agree that maybe specifically here, bishop f4 is not worse than rook c4. So I didn't grow up in LA. I grew up in San Francisco, but I mean, my first language is sort of both English and Russian. I spoke with my family Russian, so that's how. Okay, so what? What? Oh my god. What? Oh my god. Yeah, we're definitely over 5K. Damn, girl. That's 100 gifted from Altitude. I think this guy gifted 100 before. I have absolutely no words right now. Yeah, I have no words. 100 gifted from Altitude. I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, but that is unfrickin' believable. You're the absolute man. Stop subbing, let me talk about the game. And everybody's distracting me. I can't even talk about the game. What a toxic chat. Insane. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Mr. Swiss, thank you for the prime. Man, it's not stopping either. No, I still have to go at 5:55, but I will be back, as I said, after the lessons for more. Oh my god, thank you. This is ridiculous. All right, so if you guys just stop being rude and subbing and let me talk about the game, I'd really appreciate it. So bishop f4 is now much better, because if he goes queen d7, he gets pinned. Bishop c6, yeah, we'll get one more game in. Knight d7. And because we don't have to analyze the rest of this game. The last thing I want to point out here is this move rook e1. How did I find it? Well, I looked around the position for what I would call, I knew with 5 gifted. Stop it, this is crazy. And I noticed the fact that his king and the queen are on the same file. Every time the king and the queen are on the same file, you must notice that. You have to consider whether that plays into your strategy. Here it obviously does. Rook e1 and then knight d5 is a very typical tactical idea. And there's nothing he can do. He is totally paralyzed. You can basically pre-move knight d5. Even if he attacks your queen and you play knight d5, you're still going to be winning, because knight takes c7 is a smothered mate. This is beautiful. So he correctly sacrificed his queen, but why not d5? So d5 would be totally winning, but d5 is a little bit less effective than it looks. Let's make a random move for black. d5. Let's make another random move. How are you going to follow this up? Right? You can take on e6, but you're not completely winning just now. I feel like you're still going to have to go knight d5, which you could totally do. This would be winning. But I think knight d5 is a little bit more incisive, if that makes sense. It creates an immediate threat against the queen, as well as against c7 with smothered mate. That's really the bottom line here. But of course, d5 is completely winning. You could even play bishop g3 here and preserve the bishop first. Nothing wrong with that. Or take on c7 and then go knight d5. Everything is winning. Don't overthink it here. That's important. Now, okay, the rest is easy. The one thing that I missed, which would have made the win even easier, is I failed to spot that the rooks are both undefended. Loose pieces drop off. There's a very pretty move, queen e5, using the pin, sacking the bishop for the greater good, so to speak. Queen takes h8, and you win another exchange, and now you're totally winning. So queen e5 is the move. Yeah, so Hawk, that's a good point. I just want to make this point as a summarizing. This is completely winning, but if you had a slightly less one-sided position, you sometimes could pay the price for a move like d5. So the way you should think of a move like d5, there's 2 things you need to consider. When you're pushing a pawn to open up the position, 3 things to consider. The first is, can my opponent push his pawn forward, right, e5? Now in this case, of course, the answer is no. The second thing you need to consider, and this is what people I think fail to take into account, is what if my opponent ignores what I'm doing? What if my opponent does nothing or proceeds with his plan? Are you going to be able then to follow up on your attempt to open up the position? And I think sometimes people have this assumption that simply the act of pushing down a pawn is going to get the position to explode, but that's not quite true. Sometimes you have to do additional work on top of it. All right.